After we've had our meal, and we'll have some fantastic music. You'll have a front row seat. No. Well, yes, good morning. My name is Ellen Greenwood, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. It is definitely my privilege to be the Westside Unitarian Universalist Church. Westside is a congregation that welcomes each person who comes into our community with an open heart and an open mind, regardless of the path that you may have taken to get here. We welcome those of you who are with us in person and those of you who are joining us on YouTube, either right now in real time or at some time in the future. Today is a special service for us here at Westside and for our community. After the service, we'll stay, as we always do, for coffee and conversation, and that will be followed by our monthly potluck. However, today we will also be saying so long to Yetta Jager and Craig Brandt, who are leaving us very soon, sadly for us, to move to North Carolina to be near their daughter and her family. Both Yetta and Craig have been deeply involved in our community for many years, and we will miss them dearly. But today we will celebrate our good times together with food, fellowship, and some great music, so I'm told. So, please stay with us all for that. Even if you didn't bring anything for the potluck, we always have lots of food. And any of you coming in brave, there are excellent seats right up here at the front. Jonas is saving you places right here. There are announcements in your order of service, and if you are watching this from home, they are scrolling on your screen. So please do pay attention to those. You can always learn about what's going on at Westside from our newsletter and also from these announcements that are in our order of service. One thing that I do want to point out is that there's a lot happening today, and in addition to our potluck and our farewell party, our Building Your Own Theology class is beginning this afternoon right after the potluck, so about 12:45. Those of you who are participating in that will need to gather in the RE class. So, at this time, Reverend Carol will invite our bowl to sing.
We're going to play microphone games today. Ooh. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's lovely to see you all. Welcome. I am Reverend Carol Bodeau. I'm privileged to serve here as minister. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. So there's a lot going on right now. A lot going on. I have an announcement. Before I invite the bowl to sound, I want to tell you about a special thing that's happening here at Westside for our, both our green sanctuary, our environmental concerns, and also just for our building sustainability in general. So, I believe the thermometer has been hung up. For those of you who are in the building, you will see that in the entryway to the sanctuary, we now have a thermometer there. We, at our congregational meeting in the spring, the congregation voted to support pursuing a capital campaign to replace our HVAC system in our classroom wing. So a lot of people have been working on that for a very long time. You all voted to support us following through on that, and the board, under the advisement of the Green Sanctuary Committee, is pursuing that. So we are officially launching a campaign to raise funds for, this is a cool name, Warm Hearts and Cool Comfort. Okay? So the project is all about replacing the HVAC system in that wing, adding some destratification fans here, and doing some other things in the building to make our building more efficient, to make our footprint a little bit smaller, to do some things to help us be more energy efficient, and also to make sure that we're taking good care of our space. We get to do all kinds of cool things with this title, right? Warm Hearts, Cool Comfort. It's all about keeping our space warm and inviting and keeping our cool when things get a little too hot in the world. So the campaign is going to run from October, from now through January of next year, and our goal is to raise $35,000. When we had that vote in the spring, we did a little straw poll and said, if people just be willing to write down how much they think they'd be able to contribute to this project, get a number of just sort of anonymous, non-committal, but just like, this is what I think I could contribute. We did get a significant amount of sort of preliminary commitments for this project, and our goal is to raise $35,000. That might mean that we don't even have to take out a loan for the project. It might mean that we can skip taking out a loan altogether, but it would certainly reduce the amount of loan we would have to take. So there are, I think you will see the QR code on the screen in front of you. You can use the QR code. That will take you to our website. You can go there directly to westsideuuc.org to the donate window, where you're going to choose other gifts, and you can put in the amount, and you write in the note. You have to, if you choose other gifts, you have to note what it's for. You can just put HVAC 2025. You can write checks for that. So that's something we're kicking off now for the next few months. It's a great opportunity if you have investments that you need to use up distributions on before the end of the year. Now's a really good time to do that. So anyway, thank you all for paying attention to that. We do have project managers in place for that project. Charles Smith and Len Walker have both agreed to be project managers for that. And if you want more information about that project, you can certainly talk to me, anyone on the stewardship team, some of the Green Sanctuary folks. So we are going to be working on that. And a big thank you to all of the Green Sanctuary people, who, including Yetta and Charlie and Elizabeth and some other people, and Craig. Oh yeah, Craig. Yeah, Craig did a little work on that, like 6 months worth of endless paperwork on that. So they've all done a ton of work, and we're continuing to work on that. So thank you to all of them. Okay, that's logistics. Someone said to me this morning, like, I know we're having a party. Are we also having a regular service? And the answer is yes. So before you do anything else, I just want to invite you all to turn your chairs where you'll be comfortable. So if you think you need to look up here while I'm talking, turn your chairs so you're not uncomfortable. Because, yeah, I'm going to talk a lot this morning. Okay. So be comfortable. Our topic today is how we tell the story of who we are. How do we tell the stories of our identity? So as I invite the bowl to sound, I invite you to contemplate this question. If I ask you, where'd you come from? Where'd you come from? How would you answer that question?
And Yetta and Craig are going to light our chalice and our community candles this morning. For our chalice lighting, I came across these words by Reverend Laura Bogle, who is a UU minister in our area and who grew up in this area, and I thought these words were perfect for today. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. This land we live on, this water we drink, this air we breathe. These old mountains that hold us steady to the ground. These forests that give us their healing green. These flowers that give us their beauty and fragrance. These fields that give us our daily bread. These stars that show us our place. The wilderness and the tame backyards, all of it our home. We remember the ancestors who have lived on this land and who have shaped it. The Cherokee, the settlers, the mountaineers, the farmers, the hunters, the immigrants, the artists, the families, the explorers, the business people, the engineers, the builders, the scientists, the teachers, the workers, the leaders. We inherit their choices. We honor the animals and creatures that have made their home in this land, the ones here now and the ones that used to be here. We envision the future generations who will live on this land and let their voices fill our hearts. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. And it is our custom to light community candles for the concerns of our community and also the joys. This morning, we'll light our candle of concern for all those affected by the horrific explosion in Middle Tennessee this past Friday. Around 19 people, I keep hearing different numbers, are feared to have perished when a munitions plant exploded, leaving no survivors. We hold all those lost, their families, their communities in our hearts, especially the more than 300 individuals who searched through the debris in desperate hope of finding survivors. And additionally, we always light a candle of hope, even in these times when hope seems hard to find. And this morning, I think it is appropriate that we celebrate our hope that the ceasefire in Gaza will continue, that hostages will be released as promised, and that desperately needed humanitarian aid will be allowed into Gaza. This would be a joy worldwide, regardless of political allegiances.
So this morning, we're going to take a moment just for some deep breathing and meditation. We do this in spiritual practices every Sunday, but the whole congregation doesn't do it together quite as often. So this is an opportunity for us to just take a nice deep breath. So I want to invite you, if you feel so inclined, you can close your eyes or let your gaze rest on something that is soothing or peaceful to you. And I invite you to take 3 deep breaths. Breathing in and out, and in and out, and one more. Breathing in and out, and keeping your eyes closed if you feel so inclined. I'd like to invite you to call to mind an image of what feels like home to you. What does that mean for you? Is home a building, a place in nature, a favorite chair or a cat, a person, the way it feels to listen to music. Allow yourself to sink into the feeling of belonging. For so many of us, a sense of belonging is elusive. So call to yourself the sense that you belong to yourself, to this place, to this planet. Allow yourself to contemplate the ways that belonging has carried you or walked with you or stood beside you. Perhaps elusive, perhaps nearby and easy to access. Just become aware of that feeling in your body. And as you come back into this room, noticing this place, beginning to open your eyes again, allow yourself to belong even when it feels difficult. And as you open your eyes, I invite you to look around. We tell stories about how we belong or don't belong all the time. We tell stories about how we're like or different from the people around us all the time. We tell stories about where we came from and where we're going all the time, mostly without thinking about it. Today, we're going to be thinking about how we tell our stories and how other people tell their stories, and which stories make sense to us and which stories seem foreign. But behind it all is the human need to belong. So I invite you to just hold that sense that no matter what, we all belong. We all belong to ourselves, to life, and to our common humanity and our common planet, no matter what else is happening. In that spirit, Ellen has a special thing for us to remember today, and she's going to tell us about that.
Well, as part of our continuing efforts to be a welcoming congregation here at Westside, we regularly take time in our worship services to recognize LGBTQ+ days of remembrance. Yesterday, October 11th, was National Coming Out Day, honoring the courage of those who have come out publicly, those who are somewhere in the process of being fully out, and those who still do not feel that they can safely live openly as their authentic selves. In these current times, when it seems that so much of our political and social climate is unambiguously dangerous for many in the LGBTQ+ community, it is especially important, I think, and I think many of us do, that Westside steadfastly remains a welcoming congregation. Westsider Lori Allion put a post on Facebook yesterday that beautifully articulates the importance of Coming Out Day and also gives the concept a broader context that I think can apply to us all and fits very well with Reverend Carroll's words about belonging. Lori said in part, "All of this is to say that it is so important for people to be visible in all the ways that are true to their selves. On this Coming Out Day, try coming out as your full self." I, Lori, would like to see people not just come out of the closet, but come out of the boxes that we so desperately try to put ourselves into and to each other into so that we can maintain our illusion of control. A little bit gay, a little bit straight, a little bit Buddhist, a little bit Christian, a little bit pagan, a little bit Democrat, a little bit Republican, a little bit male, a little bit female, are parts of yourself hidden in boxes that they don't really belong in?
Thanks, Ellen. So, we're going to talk today about narratives and how telling stories actually has a huge piece, a huge part, a huge role to play in how we create the communities and the feeling of belonging or not belonging. So, I ask you to think about how you tell the story of where you came from. When asked about your history, if someone says, "Where'd you come from? What's your story?" Do you tell the story of your parents or their parents, where they were born and lived, or what sorts of careers they had or their hobbies? Maybe you tell the story of your struggles. Maybe if you're asked, "Who are you?" you tell the story of your struggles, things you overcame or challenges you faced. Maybe your personal version of history, maybe you tell it in a joking way, or maybe you tell it in a serious or angry way. Many of us just try not to go there at all, right? We don't even necessarily want to talk about it. But many of you know that I am really a historian as well as a minister, and so I tend to think of things and tell stories in the broad scope of human history and planetary history, reaching back through big, sweeping narratives of time, which ancestors came to America from other countries, how cultures adapted to each other when they met each other, wars that were fought, who moved their families when across great expanses of time. Right, so I tend to think in those kinds of narratives. No matter which of those we do, how we tell our story really matters. It matters in how we shape our identity and how we shape our sense of where we belong and where we don't belong. So one of the things I think is really interesting, and we don't think about this very much, is that our holidays are one of the primary ways we tell the story of who we are. Okay? So we don't think of it that way, but this is really a personal and a national or cultural thing. Right now, I would say, we're at the beginning of the holiday season, right? We say that. We're at the beginning of the holiday season. Halloween, followed by Thanksgiving, followed by Christmas, followed by New Year's. That's a cultural narrative, but maybe you have a different story. Maybe the holiday season is Mabon, followed by Samhain, followed by Yule, followed by Imbolc. Or maybe it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot and Hanukkah. Do you see how different those narratives are of identity based in which holiday season you're in? It's huge. The narrative of our holidays is actually the narrative of which culture, which people, which history we think we belong to. For LGBTQ plus people, the holidays we recognize here at Westside as part of this welcoming congregation commitment, holidays like Coming Out Day, like Day of Silence, like Trans Day of Remembrance or Trans Day of Visibility, those holidays are essential to narratives of strength and resilience and pride. So which stories and which narratives and which holidays we choose to recognize together as a community make a difference in who we are and who we're becoming. So tomorrow is a holiday. But which holiday is it? It's a pretty big and important question. So tomorrow, October 13th, the second Monday in October, okay? The second Monday in October is federally recognized here in the U.S., sort of, kind of, as Columbus Day. But for many people, especially Indigenous people, celebrating Columbus is upsetting and harmful. So many people, individuals, like states, public organizations, cities, counties, you name it, a bunch of different levels of the human community don't celebrate Columbus Day. Instead, they celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, which honors the First Nations cultures whose lands and communities were the object of the colonial agenda. Okay? And I thought it might be interesting for us in our ongoing commitment towards justice and equity and thinking about the stories we tell, I thought it might be interesting to learn a little bit more about the holiday itself and how various people tell different stories of the events that happened when you remember the poem. Older people remember the poem, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? That particular trip impacted so much of world history. And how we tell the story still shapes our identity as individuals, as communities, and as a nation. So first of all, Columbus Day is not just celebrated in the United States, okay? It is a national holiday in many cultures through both the Americas and Europe. But you can tell a lot about cultural identity, sense of belonging, who's who, from how people name this particular holiday. So, we're going to do a little bit of background. Cristoforo Colon was an Italian explorer. He was born in, I think he was from Genoa. He was funded by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. And here's a little backstory on Ferdinand and Isabella. Just as context, Isabella and Ferdinand were known for their devotion as Catholic rulers. They are famous for some very important cultural shifts. They led what is known, called now the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain, in which it was taken back from the Muslim rulers in what was known as the Al-Andalus period. Now, Al-Andalus, you've heard me talk about this before maybe. Al-Andalus is a period in history in that particular part of the world where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish cultures were living together in relative peace, collaboratively. It's considered a flowering of art, culture, music, and science, particularly medicine. It was a pretty cool time period. I mean, there were things going on, because there always are. But when Isabella and Ferdinand took the Spanish throne, they engaged in the Reconquista. And what that meant was a massive war to retake Spain, that part of Spain, and to throw out the Muslim government. And then they carried out a mass expulsion of Jews from Spain. All the Jews were kicked out, and they launched the Spanish Inquisition. One of the interesting things I learned about this time is that the Christian world at the time said that any learning or wisdom or knowledge that came from that Muslim period of flowering was all tools of the devil. And so, for example, the wisdom that had been gained in that period about women's health, for example, was considered evil. And so after that, a lot of what we knew about women's reproductive health, keeping women alive through childbirth and things like that, was banned. And so women started dying in much higher numbers because they were not allowed to use the medicine, the medical practices that had been developed. So that's important context. They paid for Cristoforo Colon to head west in search of a route to the Far East as part of a program of global colonial expansion. Now, of course, that was an important big step, because then the French and the English and the Portuguese, everybody was like, well, we want in on that too. And so then everybody started doing it. Prior to that time, there had been quite a bit of travel to the Americas in trade. There were people coming here trading, but this was really the beginning of an era of global expansionism and colonialism. So this was an important moment. Columbus went ashore at Guanahani, an island in the Bahamas, on October 12, 1492. On his return in 1493, he moved his coastal base inland 70 miles to the island of Hispaniola in what is now the Dominican Republic, and he established a settlement named after the queen called La Isabela. It's the first permanent Spanish settlement in the Americas. Now, it took him a minute to figure out that he wasn't in the Far East. Like, he did not understand his context at all for a minute. So the holiday of remembering that event is celebrated in a lot of places. I'm going to read you a short summary from that pinnacle of all knowledge, Wikipedia, about this holiday, because it gives a really interesting list of names. So I want you to listen to the names of how this is celebrated around the world. In some Latin American countries, October 12th is known as Dia de la Raza, Day of the Race. Now, this was the case in Mexico until it renamed it to Day of the Pluricultural Nation. Some countries, such as Spain, refer to the holiday as Day of Hispanicity, Dia de la Hispanidad. Since 2009, Peru has celebrated Dia de los Pueblos Originarios y el Diálogo Intercultural, which is Indigenous Peoples and Intercultural Dialogue Day. Uruguay celebrates it as Pan American Day, and the day is commemorated in Italy as Giornata Nazionale di Cristoforo Colombo. Okay, so Italy, Spain, Latin America, okay, even Canada. But do you hear the stories of identity and belonging and all the challenges, stories of resistance, debate in those titles? There's a lot going on in those titles. This holiday, more than many, gives us a window into the actual nature of cultural and personal identity formation. As the names change, as people debate about the name, we are actually asking the question, what story are we going to tell about ourselves? How do we decide where we belong and who we belong with? All right? So today we're celebrating, and this afternoon we're going to be celebrating Craig and Yetta's time here and their belonging here. And we think about all the people that have been here with us before. I want to say a special remembrance right now for Lois Calhoun, one of our founders who passed away last week. Lois was an essential, has been essential to the narrative that is West Side, right? How do we shape these stories of being and belonging? We talk about this in Building Your Own Theology, too. How do we tell the story of who we are, where we belong? So I was pretty shocked when I learned how the holiday, Columbus Day, in the U.S. got started in the first place. So the story is this. In the 19th century in America, people were celebrating Columbus a little bit, little small communities, particularly like the Italian-American communities in New York and places like that. So there was a fair amount of Italian pride, interestingly enough, not Spanish, but Italian pride around this holiday. But in 1892, 400 years after the event, something happened in America, in the U.S., that was important. At that time, Italian Americans were the object of incredible discrimination and prejudice. They were, in fact, often referred to as black. They were considered black Americans. And in early 1892, 11 Italian Americans were lynched. And And the Italian government responded to this pretty strongly, as did the Italian American community. And so in an attempt to placate the Italian government and the Italian American community, President Benjamin Harrison declared a one-time day of recognition, the 400th anniversary, as a day of recognition for Cristoforo Columbus. Okay? Now, interesting side note, it was for the celebration of that event, the World Columbus Exposition, right, that Francis Bellamy, if I say the name Francis Bellamy, anybody know who Francis Bellamy is? I pledge allegiance to the flag. So in 1885, a Civil War soldier had written a first draft of this pledge. But in 1892, Francis Bellamy was a newspaper guy and a marketing guy. And he said, you know what? This thing that I heard would be awesome to promote this Columbus thing. So he revised it and created what we now know as our Pledge of Allegiance. And it was published in newspapers and on posters and billboards and things like that. And it was adopted by schools and churches and community governments and became our national Pledge of Allegiance. So you see how the creation and celebration of holidays literally shapes our collective identity and consciousness. In the U.S. now, many cities and states have rejected the celebration of Columbus Day as part of telling a different story. They want to tell a different story. Here's a list of states that no longer, this is changing all the time, a list of states that no longer recognize Columbus Day, even though it is still the federal holiday, okay? It is still the federal holiday tomorrow. The states Alaska, Colorado, Delaware, Hawaii, Iowa, Louisiana, Maine, Minnesota, New Mexico, Oregon, South Dakota, Vermont, and Washington, as well as the District of Columbia, do not recognize Columbus Day. And people have, different organizations and different principalities, we'll call them, groups, have different levels of how they handle that. Some of them, you still get the day off. Some of them, you don't get the day off. Some of them, it's a paid holiday. Some of them, it's an unpaid holiday. Depends on where you are, okay? Akron, Ohio is a really good example of the tensions arising from trying to tell a different story. In 2017, the City Council split along racial lines when they decided to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. The Italian American community in Akron reacted strongly, and the compromise they made was this. They named the first Monday in October as North American First Peoples Day. And they kept the second Monday in October as Columbus Day, which they later renamed, and this is fascinating, they later renamed it Italian American Heritage and Culture Day. Isn't that an interesting compromise? It's an interesting compromise. In America now, Indigenous Peoples Day is an important day for First Nations people to celebrate their identities, claim their cultures, to claim their sense of belonging to this land, their histories, and to claim some power over the narrative, which was for so long not their narrative. The movement in this country towards telling a different story, a story that honors First Nations people who inhabited the continent for centuries before colonization, is a movement with many parts, okay? Of course, the story of Native resistance to colonization begins at the beginning of colonization, right? We could spend many services talking about that. But here's a few things that happened in the mid-20th century that led to our current context. It's worth knowing about these. And set the stage for changing tomorrow, the holiday tomorrow, to a different narrative. So in the 1960s and 1970s, Native Americans, led largely by youth and young adult movements, began a sweeping cultural movement often referred to as the Red Power movement. This phrase is taken from the work of a Native scholar and activist named Vine Deloria. and he called it the Red Power movement. This was a massive cultural push to reclaim Native identity, power, and self-determination for Native American individuals and tribal communities. This included groups like the American Indian Movement, or AIM, the National Indian Youth Council, the National Congress of American Indians, and many other groups. And that time, which some of us remember probably parts of, involved important cultural events, some of which were quite violent, actually, right? Protests, and really shaped a different cultural narrative around how we think about First Nations people. So here's some important events. We should know this history just as well as we know Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Here's some important events that happened within my lifetime. From 1969 to 1971, Alcatraz Island was occupied in what was the most visible occupation by Native people of abandoned federal lands, which Native people reclaimed as their own based on violated and broken treaties. In 1972, the Trail of Broken Treaties caravan involved hundreds of activists traveling across the U.S. to educate and advocate for tribal rights. In 1973 and 1975, there were tragic occupations of Wounded Knee and Pine Ridge, in which both Native activists and non-Native government agents and other individuals were killed. So there was a lot going on in the mid-20th century regarding reclaiming the story of the people who Cristoforo Colon and his landing impacted, right? In 1977, the International NGO Conference on Discrimination Against Indigenous Populations in the Americas, they met in Geneva, Switzerland, and they began to discuss replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. They wanted to advocate for doing that across the Americas. In 2021, President Joe Biden formally commemorated the Indigenous Peoples Day holiday with a presidential proclamation, becoming the first U.S. president to do so. One artist who tries to retell this history through visual representation is an artist named Kent Monkman. He's a member of the Fisher River Cree Nation in the Treaty 5 territory of Manitoba, Canada. He lives and works between New York City and Toronto, and he uses art to retell. How many of us have seen those honorific pictures of the settlers landing on the shore with the ship, and they got the flag or the whatever? We've seen those, right? He retells those stories. He's painted new pictures. And he says this: history is a narrative. It's a collection of stories sanctioned by the ruling power and reinforced through words and images that suit them. He says that his own art is an act of retelling history as a way of authorizing Native moments that have been swept under the rug for generations. So how do we feel about these narratives? What, if any, impact can thinking about all this history, which is embedded in our personal and collective holidays, what does rethinking about it do? What's the point? So I've had an interesting ongoing conversation with my family in Michigan for a while now. Actually, all of my family in all aspects, here and there. And I frequently am told, Carol, nobody thinks about these things that deeply. And because they'll say something or do something, I'll say, yeah, but... And I said recently to a family member who was happily talking about things that I was like, do you know the backstory on that? And I said, it's a little bit, being me is a little bit like being the one who pulls the curtain back on The Wizard of Oz, right? Once you've looked behind the curtain, you can't help but look behind the curtain. So the question I have for all of us is this. We are entering into the holiday season. We can't think about every single thing behind every single curtain all the time. It's exhausting. A family member said to me last week, isn't that exhausting? And I said, no, not for me, it's not, because I don't want to be lied to by my culture. I don't want to just accept the narrative because somebody else told me the narrative. I want to know the backstory. I want to see all the narratives. So we're entering into a season of narratives. We are entering into a time, it's always true. We're entering into a particular holiday season. We're also entering into a time as a nation when the stories we will be told and the stories we tell shape our belongs and who does not belong. And I would encourage us to be the people who think about it more deeply, who look behind the curtain, who ask the questions. And sometimes it means I have to unpack my own narrative, which I really like. I really like the fact that I'm a Mayflower descendant. That one's prickly. It's a prickly narrative. It's got a lot of backstories. There's some pretty ugly stories in my family backstory about being a Mayflower descendant. The next, we've got Samhain, Halloween, All Souls coming up. There's lots of ways to think about that narrative. Here at Westside in 3 weeks, we're going to be taking time to actually really think about the ancestors who have passed and rededicate our memorial garden area as a way to think about the story we tell about us and our belonging and our narrative. Thanksgiving in the U.S. is a big deal. And we need to think about that narrative. The holidays of Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all stories of belonging. So I hope that we can think about those stories. I hope that we can tell stories that are expansive rather than contractive, that open and include rather than exclude. I would hope that, for example, our story is not that Yetta and Craig have left and are not here and do not belong anymore. I would hope that our story of Westside says people who have been here are always part of us. People who have passed, people who have moved, people who have left are part of our story. They continue to be part of the fabric of who we are. That everyone we have been touched by continues to belong with us. So, in a moment, pretty soon, we're just going to have a party. So I'll be serious for one more moment. I would like us all to think for a moment with gratitude of those who have gone before us here or got us here in some way. A smile. Able today to contribute a story of loss, sadness, or struggle, that is also valuable. If you are able to contribute clothes to one of our partners that we're collecting items for, or food to our food pantry, coffee is first, and then while everybody's getting a cup of coffee, getting settled in, the food will be brought out, and then we're going to be eating, and I think there's going to be some words while we're eating, and then the music, right? Have I got that right, Yetta? Okay, awesome. So I think we're going to do one more closing thing, which is I'm going to challenge you all to say, woohoo. Do it one more time. I love the faces you make. I love the faces you make, because some of you were like, what the heck? You're allowed to make noise here too. All right, everyone, have a wonderful party, and please feel free to stay with us, even if you didn't bring food, because you belong and there's plenty for everybody.
you.